Beloved Saints, today's 5-minute message of redemptive history is about the third return from the Babylonian Captivity from the 5th book of Redemptive History series, The Promise of the Eternal Covenant. During the first return from exile, God restored the people of Judah as the central figures in redemptive history by allowing them to reconstruct the temple of God. During the second return, God restored the people's faith internally through the reforms of Prophet Ezra. Now, in the third return, God blocked off external attacks by erecting the city walls, thereby restoring the purity of the chosen people of God through reformation and revival. At the time of the third return, Judah was still under the jurisdiction of governors sent by the Persian Empire. Thus, building a city wall could be easily misconstrued as preparation for an uprising in order to gain independence. As a result of receiving the complaint letters from the opposing people, King Artaxerxes put a halt to the construction of the walls of Jerusalem. At that time, Nehemiah was a cupbearer to King Artaxerxes. He wept and mourned for days, fasting and praying before God, and then he requested the king in rebuilding the city wall. Surprisingly, the king listened to his plea and permitted the rebuilding of the city wall. Everyone, it is hard to believe that the king who had vehemently opposed the reconstruction of the walls earlier was now granting Nehemiah's request. Without God's amazing providence, it would have been impossible for the king to issue an edict, revoke it, and then reissue one that overturns the content of the previous one. Indeed, it was by God's good hand upon Nehemiah that the king granted his request. In Nehemiah 2 verse 8, he says to the king, "May I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy?" And because the gracious hand of my God was on me, the king granted my requests. Everyone, in every generation, the rise and fall of all nations of the world, as well as the success and failure of an individual, depends solely on God's sovereignty. Therefore, even if we face the greatest hardships in our lives, we will experience God's grace of prosperity in all things when we completely rely on the help of God's sovereign hand. At last, Nehemiah began the reconstruction of the city walls after the third return from exile. However, this work did not prove easy. Enemies like Sanballat and Tobiah prevented the construction from progressing through continuous opposition and threats. Because of this continuous opposition and threats, Nehemiah had the builders work with one hand and hold a weapon on the other hand to prepare for enemies' attack. Also, all those who participated in the reconstruction of the wall could not return to their home until it was all over, and they kept their duty stations in the city. Furthermore, Nehemiah and the guards did not remove their clothes and held their weapons even when they went to sleep. Due to such impregnable defense around the entire wall, the adversaries could neither attack Jerusalem nor interrupt the construction of the wall. And finally, the construction of the wall that began on the 4th day of the 5th month ended 52 days later on the 25th day of the 6th month. When we look in Nehemiah chapter 8 verses 1 to 12, it states that the people of Judah who had finished building the wall asked Ezra to read from the law, and everyone repented in tears. They also observed the Feast of Booths. They observed it on such a grand scale that such a celebration was never seen since the days of Joshua. There was great rejoicing among the sons of Israel. And this is recorded in Nehemiah chapter 8, verses 13 to 18. Beloved saints, The city wall defends against the attack from the outside, and it was built for a purpose to maintain the holiness and purity of God's chosen people. We accepted Jesus Christ and were entrusted with God's word of redemptive history. Do we have spiritual city walls that can block temptations of this world? I pray that we will completely build our spiritual wall with the help of God's good hand. Let us overcome the temptations of this world and through holiness and purity gain joy in the Lord. I bless in the name of the Lord.